Welcome to yet another episode of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. I'm Saurav, and joining me is my long-term associate Sriram Tyagarajan. We have plenty to talk about today. Of course, it's we are still in the day when the strikes, when a whole round of strikes were inflicted upon our great Western neighbor. Not really so great, but anyway. And the other thing is that, as usual, there is a lot of FUD that is being spread by, well, unsurprisingly, being spread by said Western neighbor and its boiler rooms on social media. Please do not get taken in by the FUD that is being spread. Right off the bat, they started with a claim about a number of Indian jets being shot down by them, which meant nothing, although it was amplified by the mainstream media in the West, which too is perhaps unsurprising at some level. But all that we've seen till now are drop tanks here and there. I know there are some images that have purportedly or allegedly come out of Bhatinda that shows an engine which may resemble an M88, or it could even be a banged up M53 P2 also, for all you know. Whether that image and the associated stuff being shown with it are actually from that particular geolocated spot or not, where and are of very recent vintage or not, we don't know. So it's best not to speculate, in my view. All I can tell you is this: that the Indian government and the Indian Air Force would never obfuscate an episode or an event where our pilots are involved. They would never do it. That is not our way. We don't do things this way, right? Whether it be during Kargil or during Balakot, actual losses have always been acknowledged. So let me say that over there. The other thing that I would like to say is that this it is much more likely that some unmanned systems might have gone down in up north, which are being claimed as jets, as fighter jets, and all that. So we but the point is that let us not get into too much speculation before we get official confirmation about what has happened, right? So we'll have to look at it. Acha,
Yeah,
sir,
and
some
just to
yeah.
add, uh, like sort of said, we've never shied away from acknowledging, uh, any losses of any kind. We're not the Pakistanis. We don't claim 5 air-to-air claims and become air marshals, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly,
go
overnight.
ahead.
Yeah, we don't do that, and we don't become air marshals overnight. I see a bunch of people in the uh, we are talking about Rafale BS-001 having gone down. Well, there is no official confirmation of that. Okay, so all I would say is don't get taken in by whatever is floating around on social media. Let us wait for official word on this. I can
Yeah.
assure you that if even one Indian fighter jet has actually gone down, we'll hear about it soon, if that is indeed the case. Okay, because like I said, whenever pilots are involved, we will whenever pilots are involved, the Indian side never obfuscates things, never. Okay, and today, and by the way, recently you must have seen that Air Marshal Shehzad Chaudhry, who writes all those pedantic op-eds on the Express Tribune, he sort of confirmed on one of their channels that no, Su-30, they had probably not shot down an Su-30 MKI. The Pakistanis at some point sort of can't deny the truth. So let's not go by what they have been claiming and what has been amplified. It all started with some Reuters feed article in the morning, which said there were three crashes according to four different local government officials in Kashmir. Now we don't see the local government officials don't really know what went down in the night, or what exactly was, or what the make or type of any particular military aircraft is. They might have heard something from their low ground sources, and they may have said something. It doesn't mean anything. It could well have been two drones going down and one enemy aircraft going down, that was understood to have been to that sort of a mix could well be interpreted as three aircraft going down, three crashes happening by a local government official. So let us not jump to any conclusions right now. Let us wait for official word on this matter. But I for the nth time, let me say this, let me reiterate once more, that if any fighter losses have taken place at all, we will hear about it. At the moment, we haven't heard anything really from anywhere. So let's see how that goes. Okay, before I turn to Shriram with a bunch of things, there's another thing. So this thing is not going to end right here. Okay, you've seen the number of Pakistani army, Pakistan army sort of officials and officers who've turned up at these highly televised mass funerals of terrorist targets. From that, you can see that they are not going to, they are not going to sort of deny or obfuscate. They can't really, and that they are standing in solidarity with those who have been sort of taken out in these strikes, those who have been killed in these strikes, and they cannot possibly retain any face with the jihadi tanzim if they don't do anything, because they have a, like, the world has a military industrial complex, Pakistan has a military jihadi complex, right? So it's just not possible for them to not do anything, and in any case their doctrine, quid pro quo, quid pro quo plus, right? So they have to do something. For force, they have to do something. Otherwise, their doctrine would be drain alongside their economy. So, and given the what we know of the Pakistanis, their doctrine is always very dear to them. Their economy might not be, but doctrine definitely is. So we will see a retaliation from their side. When Balakot had happened, I had written an op-ed that night itself where I had said that the Pakistan Air Force will definitely retaliate, and I can see that happening here too. Only thing is, I don't think they are going to do it quite the same way again, because we are pretty much prepared for it. What we need to look out for is their using asymmetric means, A, and B, also using surface to surface missiles, loitering munitions, and of course, a general one way attack drones, I mean, suicide drones against us. That could be one of the modes in which they retaliate, because we've also done that this time, right? It's not as if we've only launched a whole bunch of scalp cruise missiles and hammers at them from Rafales, or a BrahMos or two, or maybe something from the naval side as well. We've also launched a whole bunch of loitering munitions. We've even used multi quadcopter drones, dropping those small mortar sized bombs on them. I have a feeling that that look like one of those Zeus numerics, quadcopters that we've seen in expos in the recent past. I have a feeling it could be one of those. Anyway, so we are definitely going to see some retaliation from their side. If we see them building up into some sort of a large force engagement, etc., etc., I don't think we should just wait around. This cannot be an epicea. That's the Zeus numerics sort of quadcopter drone that I was just talking about. And the number of munitions dispensed in that video was also three, by the way. And you see three of those motor sized, although aerodynamic better, with better aerodynamics, obviously, I mean, adapted for air delivery bombs over there, or designed. In fact, these might be designed to from the ground up to be like that. So the other thing that I was going to say, yeah, those are the munitions. The other thing that I was going to say is, we must also not wait around for them to build up into a large force element and then hit something of their choosing. This is not how we should go about things either. This cannot be an episodic, sequential game where one side bats first and the other side fields, and then the next side comes to bat after, after the break. That this is not a one-day match or a test match. This is war. So sometimes preemption is its own reward. With that, let me turn to Shyam. Shyam, what do you think? Is preemption its own reward? At least sometimes.
There are multiple considerations, like with anything when it comes to national security. If you think about it, there's the oft-repeated saying that war is just means for getting your political objectives done. So, what are the political objectives, and what national security objectives derive from those? So, off the bat, the ultimate goal is obviously to reduce Pakistan-originated terrorism to rubble. So, and everybody knows that there are two sides of the coin. one is the Salwar Kameez jihadis, and one is the uniform jihadis, right? So until now, even today, if you read the government statement that was put out in the morning, they were very careful to explicitly mention that only terrorist camps and terror related infrastructure were hit, and no military targets were hit, no military installations, facilities were hit. So, India itself separating the terrorists from the states established establishments which actively run and fund and train and just guide the whole terrorist movement is something that we have to come to terms with, or at least I would say the government has to start immediately switching to drawing an equivalence or making it public that it is the state. I mean, when it comes to the Pakistani state, we are talking about the Pakistani army, right? So they are the state, not the so-called elected bodies or the elected members. So the Pakistani state itself is a terrorist state, which having gotten its ass whacked in multiple wars at our hands, and even had to suffer the humiliation of a Bangladesh. So if you look back, we've had the Sikh and the Kashmiri Punjab and the Kashmiri militancy beginning in the 80s and late 80s when it really got bad. So all that history and story is to see that it is the state which has consistently been on a war path against India right from 48, right? The whole attack on the currently Pakistan occupied part of the Jammu and Kashmir state. So drawing this false line between the uniformed guys who are the real masterminds behind the whole thing, multiple attacks on civilians over decades, and the guys who wear salwar kameez and a big beard and carry a couple of old AKMs and dry fruits to get into Kashmir. That is, in my and a lot of people's opinion, straitjacketing us without targeting the whole issue as a consolidated approach towards removing this issue entirely. I mean, I get it. Until say about 15 years back, our economic situation was quite terrible. So we really didn't have the kind of pull that we needed. But again, in 1962, what situation was Mao's China in financially, right? Fiscally. They were eating bark and, according to some reports, each other in the cities in the east.
No, not some reports. It's well documented. Cannibalism during that period is well documented.
Cannibalism, essentially, right? In the streets and the cities in the east. And still he had the madness, gumption, aim, whatever you want to call it, right? But he was still focused on fighting a war, a border war, in a region that was like out of sight for anybody in China, right? In the eastern side. So that kind of focus, yeah, in a democracy, it is difficult to achieve. Yes, because there are 1,000 issues that are pulling the attention of any politician. But national security has to be in the top three for any politician, right? If you want to run a nation state, if you are looking at long-term progress as well as the nation's security itself. So when you consider all of this, you have to realize that you need a consistent and properly chalked out path so that you can, bring down this whole menace entirely. Just doing one surgical strike using some special forces, or again, one strike against one terrorist installation will not really create deterrence, because every time you keep saying we're only attacking non-military targets. I'm not saying declare war today. There are other means to achieve what we want instead of sending in our planes at first go. Right, we've begun that with the Indus Water Treaty, putting it on hold, and other financial measures like banning exports and imports and movement of people. So there are ways to put the squeeze on the state, because for those who've not really spent a lot of time reading about what the Pakistan Army itself is, there's a wonderful book called Pakistan Inc., Military Inc., I think, by a Pakistani lady who had written about how the army itself has set up an entire financial economic empire within the country and functions as a state within a state. It's not for nothing that we hear that the army, the state exists for the army and not the otherwise when it comes to Pakistan. Anyway, all of this aside, what we come back to is that we need sustain. If we do go for the military route, right, one day's attack on 5 or 10 targets is not enough. It is not going to deter, right? But what we've moved over the past 3 such strikes that we've done was, first time we sent in a team on the ground. Second time was an aerial strike across the border. Now, the first one, sending teams across, has always been happening, right? They've always been sending BATs, and we've also sent teams across, apparently, right? So it was a known element of action, right? Let's put it that way. Sending in fighters or striking using the Air Force across the border, even if we didn't send the Air Force initially, the MiG-29 went across during hot pursuit and not exactly as part of a big strategy to cross the border and go in and hit. We did the same thing during Kargil also, which put a lot of operational constraints on the Air Force's planning. Anyway, so after that, we've sent in a ground team and we've done cross-border aerial strikes against 1 target or 3. It's still slightly murky, but let's take it as 1. Now we have 9 targets. But in the interim, right, we've had consistent and repeated terrorist attacks on military columns and even civilians. Remember, Reasi terrorist attack was also on civilians, even before Pahalgam. I think people have kind of ignored the past 3 years of attacks in the Jammu and Kashmir region, precisely because a lot of it was against the military personnel, except for the Reasi attack.
Reasi bus, right?
Yeah, the bus, where the bus plunged into the ravine.
Most of the casualties happened because the bus fell into the gorge.
Yeah. Still, again, if you're going to shoot at a bus driver and they're driving in the Himalayan region, it is a given.
And that was definitely an attack on civilian targets. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So, and we also had major military personnel casualties. The whole attack in Kokarnag, when we lost higher level officers, for instance, right? So we've had consistent attacks in the region, except that 99% of it was against military personnel. So the deterrence that we expected, or the let's say the posturing that was done, saying deterrence will now be built based on these strikes, hasn't happened. But what has happened that you can miss when you're looking at it in this way is that successive attacks have pushed the threshold for how much and how much the Pakistanis retaliate, right? So we've always heard, for the kids, right, of today, of the 2010s and 2020s, let me remind you, when Musharraf was king, he would often talk about nuclear red lines, and not just him, all the other idiots in Pakistan government, irrespective of which party they belong to. They would always do this nuclear saber rattling. And throughout the 2000s, we had so many terrorist attacks across major cities in India. And every time there was talk about retaliation or there was public pressure for retaliation against such terrorist attacks, the Pakistanis would conveniently come out and say, any attack on Pakistan's facilities or installations would invite a nuclear strike, because that is our new red line for going nuclear. Right, and even now, even just a couple of weeks ago, you had ministers talking about going nuclear. I think some idiot minister of the Pakistan government said it even a couple of days ago. Right, so that bluff has been called for the second time, and at a much larger scale. Right, imagine everything from fighters to loitering munitions to drones going in and hitting targets. And Bahawalpur is very deep within the Pakistan, from the Pakistan boundary, from the international border. So going there and hitting targets, and the other targets within Punjab, right? Pakistani Punjab. And they're all big cities. Sialkot is not a small city. So hitting targets there, knowing that Pakistani military formations are based in some of these cities. Bahawalpur, for instance, holds a core. Right? So hitting them also conveys the message that you can hit military installations with just as much ease, right? So this pushing the red line, the so-called red line that the Pakistanis have back towards where it realistically should be, or is, in fact, you're removing all the the bluffing that they do. So the line is actually over here, and you've moved it over multiple strikes. That is something that we've done.
But it needs to be moved much more if deterrence has to be restored, as you said. So, see, it's like this. As you have pointed out, deterrence, just carrying out these strikes on air strikes and ground-based strikes also on these 9 sort of terrorist targets is not going to restore deterrence in the India-Pakistan state of affairs, or in the India-Pakistan balance. And one thing is for certain: the Pakistanis will retaliate, because their doctrine is quid pro quo plus, as I said, and they have to. The military jihadi complex has to stand together. It's a terrorist state after all. It's not. It's not. It's like the like Hohenzollern dynasty Persia. It's an army with a state, and in this case,
Correct.
a terrorist army with a state, not the other way around. So, so that is where we are at. So, but the way in which they will respond may not be the same way in which they responded the last time. So, these are the things we need to look at. One thing is they could use, MLRS strikes in border regions. They could use the A100Es, because the A100Es aren't really good for counter battery fire, really, right? And they don't have 450 of them, unlike what Wikipedia tells you. They have only about 60 of them that they had brought in 2015. Right, so let us be clear about that as well. That 450 thing comes from an article written by one of our retired generals, Lieutenant General PC Katoch. I think it's a typo in the article he wrote, because that is what is linked. That is the link given in Wikipedia. Unfortunately, our media keeps amplifying that number as well. Anyway, the other thing is, we also don't know how many rockets they have at their disposal, how many 300 millimeter rockets. That's another matter. We'll come to that in the course of this program as well. So they may well respond against one of our naval targets, because I'll tell you one thing, one of our naval assets, because I'll tell you one thing about them. Their modus operandi is very clear. They do something knowing fully well that there will be a response, and then they try to down some of our assets, some of our pretty expensive assets, and then use the international press to amplify that and talk about how great they are. Okay, so don't put it past them to attempt a sneak attack on one of our naval units, one of our principal service combatants. In this slide, I would like to mention the movement of all those F-16 Block 52s of the Fizalya to Pasni, which is close to Gwadar and obviously close to the sea coast. Because Block 52s, I have flagged this in an earlier program also, I'm flagging it again. Pakistan Air Force's Block 52s have the APG 68, right, version 9 radar, which has SAR and ISAR modes. stations 3 and 7 of the Block 52 plus can carry the AGM-84L Harpoon Block 2. Right. And in September 2022, the Americans green lighted a whole package of software plugs to the Pakistanis for modifying their store management system and their accessory kits and all that. We don't know if an interface adapter kit was included in that. We don't know if the store's management system has been modified to carry the AGM-84L Block 2 Harpoon. But this is something that we need to keep in mind. See, because what was said was that those Block 52 pluses have been shifted to Pasni because they are worried about losing them to the S400. That is, that is one way of looking at it, but this could be another thing that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah,
so I
and
think our
they
naval
don't think
units, which are
that way.
probably,
They don't think that way.
Yeah,
They don't think that way.
yeah, but our naval units have to be on high alert, and I'm sure somebody in Naval HQ must be already thinking about these matters. So that is one thing. The other thing is that they, given that we have, like you said, you mentioned, we've hit some pretty sizable, well known places as part of these surgical strikes. They are also going to retaliate against population centers. They're already doing that along the line of control. People are mentioning what is happening in Poonch sector, etc. So we have to up our civil defense game. Civil defense is a woefully neglected area in India. There are somebody was mentioning that old bunkers and defense lines that were created in Punjab years and years ago. Those are also sort of in a slightly decrepit state. Those will also have to be refurbished if they are. I haven't visually gone and verified the same, because the last time I went to Punjab was during a while ago, during the Heat and Dust project, although I did go to some very interesting places. But anyway, so we have to do that across India. We have to have civil defense structures. A whole bunch of places were identified in Delhi also for use as civil defense shelters. That needs to be done. There are large buildings with basements in them. Those basements are being used for all kinds of strange activities. The government needs to look into this matter. So that is the other thing. So civil defense has to be brought up to speed, because deterrence by denial is always important. We have to be ready for the Pakistani riposte. We should not allow them to just build up and do something. If our ISR observes something, we should preemptively move on it. See, the whole talk was, the whole idea, what Sriram said about, saying this is a non-military target. We won't escalate if you don't retaliate. We won't escalate ourselves, but we will retaliate if you escalate. So what we are telling them is that they should that we are willing to let this be episodic. But I don't think we have the luxury of doing that really. Yeah, I'll tell you why. There are both push and pull factors involved over here. The first thing is they are not going to give you that luxury. Somebody told me, what if we don't do anything to the Pahalgam attack? They were not going to stop at Pahalgam. Their Chinese pals have gamed this whole thing. They need India to do something because of the state of affairs inside their own country. The Pakistani army is using losing the Punjabi Awam also. So they need to consolidate things. Forget about what is happening in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Those are going out of control anyway. So have gone out of control, in fact, in Balochistan. So they need
Punjab.
something to unite the country behind them. So they were going to do this. They also know that there are costs associated with us not doing something. They thought it was a win-win, but it need not be. People often start wars and skirmishes thinking it will be something that they will do well in, but it sometimes doesn't turn out to be the case, as Russia has found out in Ukraine also, by the way. But in our case, I can tell you, we didn't start this. We don't have the luxury of not, taking advantage of the situation either. And I'll tell you why. The Pakistan's foreign reserves are at 15.5 billion. They're not quite as low as they were some months ago when they were hit 8 billion or so, many months ago. But anyway, their food situation is also not great. Crop failures are likely in some areas. Their military has exported a lot of 155 millimeter shells, 122 millimeter rockets to Ukraine. We don't know what their war. I don't know, but I'm sure our intelligence knows. And what reports we are getting is that war wastage reserves may not be very great either. They are running low on petroleum oil and lubricants. This can be gauged, of course, even from open source analysis. So they are not in the greatest position to actually sustain a 30-day war, really. At the same time,
let me quickly jump in 1 second.
Yeah, jump in.
Just a quick anecdote. The Pakistani Prime Minister or whoever is running the show there went hand in hand to Saudi Arabia very recently, within the last couple of months, I think, to Saudi Arabia to go and ask MBS for a handout for buying fuel. Right? So that is the state of the country right now.
Exactly, that is the state of the country, and we cannot allow them to get away with it and wait for the Chinese to prime them up even more with J-35s, more Yuan and Yuan class AIP submarines, etc., etc. We have to act now, because I'll tell you what the argument against acting is. The argument is simple. This is something that I have discussed for a long time, and I said that we should be careful about what we do. We are in a geo-economic sweet spot after years and years. All kinds of Western countries with large consumer markets want to do FTAs with us, etc. So the opportunity is great, and that is precisely why they've done this now, because they want to hurt us when they think we are going to be in some kind of we are going to be on a rising economic trajectory for at least a couple of decades. That is why they want to hurt us. The Chinese also want to slow down the movement of global supply chains to India, political risk. I've written about this, tweeted about this. So I understand this argument very well. However, do not think that they are just going to stop at this. First of all, they will retaliate to our actions. Second, they would not have stopped with just Pahalgam. At the same time, their situation is dire. The Pakistan army situation is dire. And this is the time to knock out one front. We keep talking about 2.5 front war, 2.5 front war. No sane country fights a 2.5 front war. We've already destroyed that half front to a great degree, although many won't agree, but I'll tell you why. The greatest single insurgent threat to India was the CPI Maoist. And the CPI Maoist is really on the mat now. And the claims that are being made that they will cease to be a insurgent threat by 2026 are not outlandish at all. Those are very valid claims in my opinion. I have traveled a lot, by the way, in Jharkhand and places like that. I've even actually been through my wife and I had traveled through a jungle road where 2 IED blasts had taken place in the last 6 months. So I've seen those places close by. I can tell you that even the local populations there had become really tired of this great, so-called people's movement and all that, which wasn't a people's movement anymore. It was filching of the people and was a terrorist threat to India. And now it is on the mat. So that 0.5 front is being taken care of. It is now time to take care of one of the two fronts. Okay. And this is the moment to do it, because things will escalate. The onus of escalation may have been put on Pakistan, but we should not wait to let them build up and do what they want. If we see that they are up to something, we should preempt if required and move on to the next level of the ladder. And the way to do it, I'll tell you what. Shriram mentioned the red lines. So they usually talk about 4 nuclear red lines, right? And one of those red lines is apparently significant destruction of their naval and aerial forces. But I think this is the least credible red line that the Pakistanis have postured with over the years. And we have to ensure that this episode leads to severe attrition of their naval and air forces, because I'm telling you, without their air forces, their army will not have a leg to stand on. They are not in a position to sustain even a 20-day campaign right now, probably. Right? And our munitions production has gone up immensely in the last 5 years.
The main thing that we were scared of,
well. Yeah,
right?
Go ahead. Yeah.
The main thing we were scared of was artillery ammunition production, and we've ramped that up considerably over the past 1.5 years. So all the fears that we had about sustaining artillery barrages over a sustained conflict, say even over 2 weeks, is no longer an issue. We have the state DPSUs cranking out ammunition. We have private sector companies cranking out ammunition. So we have multiple sources today for artillery, 155 millimeter ammunition. That is no longer a limiting factor for us anymore. And to add, right, given that we are talking about capabilities, right, production capabilities, 155 mm is no longer an issue. The DPSUs have been supplying 5.56 mm ammunition everywhere, right, even exports, when there was a massive shortfall of said ammunition a few years ago. So that is also sorted. We have a triple S defense facility coming up almost ready for production. We'll check with Vivek. And there's an Adani facility which is already producing small arms ammunition. And there are one or two other players also. So, small arms, artillery, all of this is no longer an issue.
Reliance is also entering the mix with
Yeah.
a large artillery ammo production complex.
Yeah. So when it comes to such consumables, we are no longer restricted or limited. Where we are limited is precision munition, mainly the imported missile stocks. We may or may not be able to get rush deliveries if we ask, given the situation in Ukraine and Russia. But the 10I situation, I'm sure it's manageable. But there are political considerations. We've never had China entering the fray when we've had any sort of conflict with Pakistan across the two wars and Kargil. In fact, they were the ones who apparently laid roads among the fingers and the points in Pangangso when we had to move formations.
You're talking about Srijap. They built a road across Srijap at that time.
Yeah.
99.
So they've never really entered in force to support the Pakistanis whenever we've had a conflict. Now, the question is, I know the political and bigger picture is always there. That is a political question called for them to take. But speaking about military preparedness, be it tactics, strategy, ensuring the whole kill chain works, refining the process, finding out holes and figuring out solutions for them, as well as in this particular strike, we've used hammers, maybe scalps, maybe a BrahMos. There's no significant evidence for the scalp and the BrahMos, but yeah, let's assume we've used them. And we've also used loitering munitions, drones for ISR, the
battle damage assessment.
Yeah, the Muridke strike especially, the video is coming from something airborne and pretty far away and in a slant viewpoint. So we made use of a lot of these assets, and I'm pretty sure even before all of this, we've had space-based assets doing ISR for us, pinpointing targets, final details, as well as I'm sure there was be ground-based intelligence also. So we've put all of this to use and done a strike. I'm pretty sure this morning we've had satellites flying over and getting imagery. Might not see the light of day outside in public, but I'm sure it has been used to determine efficacy of every single strike, not just the fighter delivered weaponry. So if you continue, what happens is you figure out, I mean, Vayu Shakti, Gagan Shakti are fine because you do it over 1 or 2 days and it is an exercise at the end of the day. Doing it in real conflict over a week or 10 days really teaches you a lot of lessons. I mean, when the Russian-Ukraine war began, a lot of people didn't really give FPV drones a lot of credence. But within weeks, everybody realized how stunningly effective they could be. And we've seen them go from RF-controlled drones to now fiber optic drones to, trying to get to the next level because even fiber optic drones are getting targeted. And on the other side, we have countermeasures being tried out, but not much has become, super effective against an FPV drone just flying in, right, and hitting you from the side at a low angle. So warfare evolves during war at an extremely rapid pace. So we've not really had let's not call it a positive, proper conflict since Kargil. And even Kargil was very limited. So we've not fought a proper significant war since 71. Everything else has been skirmishes and minor conflicts. Kargil was a slightly bigger conflict, right? So we've not had a whole of nation approach to anything. Nothing existential, obviously, but something that pulls in all three services over a week would really pull out a lot of holes in the whole process. Those are things we need to fix if we are really serious about the threat to our north. Those guys have a lot more volume, have a lot more assets in place before they even strike, right? And we will have a lot of targets to hit. So prioritization, running through your stocks, figuring out how intensive it will be, how many you will need over a day and across a campaign. All of these are fine when it's a tabletop exercise or a paper based exercise or even a 2-3 day exercise. But actually doing it makes a lot of sense. And it is better that you neutralize to a greater extent one front rather than having the Pakistan also being strong enough to cause trouble if we fight against the Chinese. Because if we do fight against the Chinese, the Pakistanis will not sit quiet. They will enter.
Yeah, but see, one thing is there. So the point is well made. We need a military blooded for the 21st century fight, as it were, right?
Yeah.
All kinds of command and control concepts have to be tested out. Various other, other things. There are a whole bunch of things that need to be fine tuned and tested. And the other thing is that we also have to consolidate our military industrial complex. So because that is absolutely necessary for India's security going forward. Both of those things will be served by 10 days of intensive war, or 10i, the scenario 10i that you sort of talked about. Of course, what the Chinese will hope for is that the attrition on our side is severe during those 10 days of war, but that is not going to be the case because of what I laid out, given the state of affairs in Pakistan as far as munition stockpiles, etc., are concerned. And as far as the Chinese intervening, they didn't intervene in 71. They said that the passes are closed, the Himalayan passes are closed, right? And they were, but of course they didn't intervene anyway. And in because they knew after 1967 that it wouldn't go too well, right? So
Yeah.
they knew that as well. And they did not intervene in Kargil except that road they built through Sirijap 5 that they built. They did build that. Right now, of course, they are much more conversant with the terrain. They are deployed in force. They have 100,000 soldiers there who are with the units being rotated and soldiers being rotated all the time. And their posture is much more aggressive than it has ever been in the past. They have refurbished air bases. So they can intervene much more at much shorter notice than they could in the past also, and in a much more significant way. They could. But whether they will or not is a different matter, because till now all that we've seen is they have essentially moved forward when nobody is there. Whenever somebody is actually there, they have sort of avoided the kind of contact you would imagine that could take place, when large formations face each other. They've never done that. So that is there. At the same time, like I said, right there, just knocking out a few terrorist camps will not equate to deterrence. Everybody understands that, especially when the other side will use the international media and crow about how they shot down 500 Indian fighter jets or some nonsense like that, right? Why five? Why not say 500? In fact, the Pakistani shot down the moon also. No, sorry, they shot down the Vikram lander on the moon as well. Okay, so that sort of thing they've done now. That's the sort of claims they make. So we can't have that. That means nothing. And on top of that, if Pakistan retaliates and kills a bunch of civilians in across Indian cities, then I don't see how scenario 10i will not unfold. Scenario 10i is going to unfold one way or the other, right? We are going to see that escalatory ladder being climbed over here. So I think people should be prepared for that. Civil defense measures should be now taken up in full earnest everywhere. Quick shelters should be created on a war footing, veritable war footing. And we should not think that this thing will just wind down just like that, because I don't see how it can just wind down just like that. Suppose tomorrow the Pakistanis launch a bunch of loitering munitions at Jamnagar refinery, right? Or they hit or they hit one of our new railway bridges as part of the USBRL, the Chenab Bridge, for instance. Suppose they hit that. Are we just going to take it? No, we've already said that if there is a response, retaliation, escalation from Pakistan, we will retaliate. We've already said that. If they kill some more civilians somewhere, we will retaliate. What I'm trying to say is that we should not wait around for a stepwise process to unfold. if we see them building up, we must stay, we must preempt if as and when required, because it will ultimately end up being the kind of scenario we are talking about anyway, right? So we should be prepared for that. The public should be prepared for that. On the other hand, yes,
But
as far as
yeah,
the economy is
to
concerned, yeah, go ahead.
to continue along this line
Hmm.
before we head to the economy, it comes back to the same point, right? We are not hitting terrorists who operate in a vacuum entirely out of control of the Pakistani state. The state runs the terrorist industry. So unless we target the state, the terrorist industry will continue to exist and continue to harm us. So the end game is to reduce the capability of the so-called Pakistani army, right? So until that is the goal. So until we do that, we will continue to have terrorist attacks. No matter how good your shield, one or two strikes will get past. And we are putting expensive resources at risk to hit what is essentially cannon fodder, right? So the guys that are the terrorists that our coin grid eliminates anywhere in the Jammu and Kashmir region are pretty much like Kasab, foot soldiers, cannon fodder, who hold zero value to them and us. But they tie down resources, and they can also, let's say, cost us valuable lives. Highly trained soldiers, uh, extremely expensive assets. The MiG 29 might, the MiG 21, even the upgraded one, might be, ancient, but it is still a valuable asset of the country, right? Same thing with pilots. Imagine if a pilot got shot down, right? If Abhinandan had gotten shot down, so we would have lost a valuable asset, a citizen, a soldier, all of that, right? So is it worth spending so much resource on hitting a bunch of idiots? Might as well use that to hit and reduce the threat, right? It's like filling, the interest on a loan instead of the capital, stuff like that. So the point remains, until we seriously target the Pakistan army, this will continue. So sending in valuable assets to hit targets is good. The whole deterrence discussion that we had earlier, right? So that is still valid, but that is a separate part, right? So the deterrence and the existence of the PA itself are hand in hand. So we are only doing one part of it, and even that is a secondary, let's say, positive coming out of the strikes. So if we lose aerial assets of any kind, then I don't think we're getting enough out of putting such assets at risk. Might as well go in, blow up a couple of air bases, a bunch of F-16s on the ground, then hit terrorist targets, right? Will it lead to a full-blown war? Given the current international scenario, it might not happen.
Even this escalatory ladder will lead to a full blown war eventually, and very quick, not that slowly either. So that is the point I'm trying to make. See, you just destroying a bunch of terrorist targets and having the other side talk about shooting down 3 fighters, 5 fighters, etc., and the usual information warfare campaign that goes with it, that you see on social media, that you're seeing already, that does nothing at the end of the day. That does not restore deterrence. That only leads to the terrorist state crooning here, there, and everywhere as to how great it is. You have to change the way people perceive things, and for that you have to demonstrably sort of make them kneel. It's as simple as that, and there are ways to do that, and scenario 10I is one of those ways. Okay, there will come a time when the Pakistanis will cry uncle before they cry nuke. They can be made to cry uncle before they cry nuke, and that is what we have to say. They've cried nuke enough. Now it's time for them to cry uncle. Okay,
Yeah,
so
and
that is because this thing is
yes.
not going to end. If you think that Pahalgam was the last chapter in these kinds of, heinous attacks on Indian soil by sort of terrorist huntsmen, then there is nothing left to say really, because that is
Yeah.
not the case. That is
Tomorrow
not
we
going to
might
be the
have
case.
something in Srinagar.
Yeah, tomorrow you might have something in Jamnagar, in the Jamnagar refinery itself. You might tomorrow they might up the ante by moving to a radiological weapon, for all you know. You cannot not, see the situation as it is today, and you cannot wait for the Chinese to buffer them up anymore. You just can't wait for that. You have to knock out one front now, as the situation presents itself, because always the argument will be this, that there is, our economic trajectory is different. I'm the one who has given those arguments anyway, right? But I'm the one also now saying that the things as they stand, things as they are, you see, the enemy always gets a vote. It is Let us not be cute enough to think that we'll manage the whole escalatory ladder all by ourselves, and we'll manage the whole situation all by ourselves. It's not like that. And especially this enemy, which is backed by one superpower, who's also bearing down on another front, and also has a tacit old arrangement with another superpower. That is the enemy we are talking about. That is why this enemy is so emboldened anyway. See, the Americans are also giving the kind of statements they are giving because they want to put pressure on us for that free trade agreement. They are not happy that we haven't yet yielded to all their demands. So that game is also underway right now. Beijing, of course, wants to keep using this terrorist proxy, which it thinks serves its purposes rather well. So that is the situation. So before we go into some great millennial strategy where we'll think about how to deal with Washington and Beijing separately on how what we can do, we have to understand, we have to at least knock out this immediate front. This one has to be made silent for at least a couple of decades, or at least a decade. That is what we need. We need a decade of silence on this front, and I think scenario 10I can achieve that. Let's go to some questions now, Shriram.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Let's look at some questions. Yeah, we had one earlier. Yeah, user XA101. Nice name. Any speculative timeline for the long duration hypersonic cruise missile and the HGV? The HCM Saurav had written a piece, an interview, I think, with Dr. Reddy or Dr. Kamath. I forgot. He can correct me. The timeline was 5 years from the first successful flight. Now we have the recent announcement that we had a 1,000-second successful combustor operation. 1,000 seconds at Mach 6. Mach 1 is Mach 3 is 1 kilometer per second. So Mach 6 is 2 kilometer per second. At 1,000 seconds, that is 2,000 kilometers range. At Mach 6. And people think that the BrahMos hits heavy. So, yeah, that thing will be massive. But as for timelines, we're expecting maybe in a couple of years. I think we should see a proper full-scale test within a year. If the ground rig test is gone on for such a long time, I'm sure we'll see a test very soon. And then after that, building a vehicle around the combustor, which has already been proven, shouldn't take too long. Because there's no difference, right? You just need a warhead somewhere. Even a tiny one will do, because at the speed it's going, right, mv square. So Mach 6's velocity square is somewhere high. As for the HGV, at the recent Vigyan Vaibhav at Hyderabad, Rajnath Singh had visited DRDL, and there were multiple pictures of the MIRV bus and the HGV itself. So, and it looked like a proper prototype. So maybe we'll see a test soon, or maybe it has already happened. A lot of tests do not get reported these days. So we never know. So, and HGV has to test a whole bunch of flight regimes and altitude regimes, and multiple tests are required. So the HGV might take longer. I would say the HCM is closer to realization. Uh, Maybe a test very soon, and then we'll get some information as to the timeline that we're looking at. I would say anywhere between an all up test might be 2 3 years max. There's another thing, right? The Kusha program, the XLR SAM program, whatever they wanted, whatever is the current nomenclature for it, that should go into testing very soon, or should have happened by now. But I'm expecting that to happen. Ravindra and XAO, no one, thank you so much for your contribution. Uh,
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
next one is
Yeah,
from Ravinderjit
yeah.
Singh.
I'll
Thank you
just add
again.
something about the yeah. Thank you,
Yeah, go ahead.
Ravinderjit Singh. You're a long-term supporter. Yeah, one thing about the hypersonic cruise missile, long distance, is that scramjet combustor test is very significant. 1,000 seconds. That's a world record actually, and it was done with active cooling. That is the most important part, because typically what happens is the materials inside the combustor, they can melt in as low as just 5 seconds. Something like mnemonic C103 etc would melt within 5 seconds inside the combustor. It's that hot. So you need active cooling, and that is the most important part. This is of course the first step towards the creation of a hypersonic cruise missile. So you're going to see more HSTDV tests first and all that, and then in my view you would see a program being launched for a weaponized variant. So somewhere in the 2030 odd timeline would you start seeing these sort of coming to the fore. Hypersonic light vehicle would probably happen quicker. Sriram already talked about it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, somebody else is asking, Nahusha Acharya, thank you for your contribution. He's asking, can India ramp up manufacturing like USA did under Bill Knudsen during World War II? Arsenal for democracy. Well, not proportionately to that level, but yes, it can. It is already ramping up production of all kinds of things. You have to give the private sector clarity, and you have to give it orders on time. You have to tell the private sector, boss, now my war wastage reserves will have to be for 100 days. Okay, when you send out that kind of signal and you start placing orders, that is when you start seeing the kind of production that you desire. It's very simple, and the private sector can very much do it. They can bring in the necessary machinery, they can bring in the necessary skilled manpower, they can bring in the right managers, they can do all of it, and so can the former ordnance factory board units, which have been unbundled into 7 corporate entities. I mean, Munitions India Limited and Yantra India Limited should not be underestimated. Both of them actually have surge capacity for what they do. Munitions India Limited produces the final munition, whereas of course Yantra India Limited provides the casings and all. So that is something that we should definitely look at, and we should get ready. We should understand that, see, what kind of a world are we in. I had tweeted during some years ago that we are in World War III already. Last year you had a bunch of American experts talk about how we are in World War III, basically echoing those words, those sentiments. We are already, it was bound to be the case that the India Pakistan theater at some point would become hot, because we've seen that from theater to theater, right? We've seen the Russia Ukraine theater, we saw Russia Ukraine become hot, then we saw Israel Palestine become hot, Israel Iran also become hot, and now we are seeing India Pakistan become hot. Of course this will also be winded down because of the nuclear backstop, but 10I can always happen, which is 10 days of intensive war. This is something that has been reported in the press quite a bit also in the past, that the Indian military at some point was told to prepare for a scenario like this. I think Hindustan Times had carried a bunch of articles. Anyway, so the next, after India Pakistan winds down, the next thing to go up would of course be East Asia. That is going to happen, and 2027 is the date for that, right? But if 2027 doesn't end in a nuclear holocaust, which it probably won't, because there also the nuclear backstop will ride heavy. 2029 is the year when we might have a showdown with China again on the line of actual control and more. So that is the date we have to be ready for, and that is what we need to prepare for. We need to really ramp up production, because if the limited war is going to be far more intense than limited wars of the past, right? It's going to be like a much more widespread war in terms of the consumption of munitions, because it's going to be that that is the level to which you will have to push back against the enemy to prevent the enemy from, presenting you with a fait accompli. Millions of drones will be used every hour. Tens of thousands of artillery rounds will be used up, right? You will have a electronic battle raging like no tomorrow. There will be dogfighting in space between satellites, which you're already seeing. See, there'll be a whole bunch of, there'll be the cyber war duel will continue. There will be naval engagements. So you have to be ready for attrition. You have to be ready for overmatch also, so that you can deter some others from joining in as well. So that is what we have to be ready for in the near future. And we are talking about a 4-year time frame. Okay, so last question, Surjit Swain asks, I saw the AVAC situation 2019 to now, your views. You know what the situation is. We have three AEWC and AAWNC Mark 1s, and we have three IL 70, 78 based Falcons. And on the anvil are Netra, 6 Netra Mark 1As and 6 Netra Mark 2s. Let Shriram take this up because he has talked a lot with the project directors of those programs. Shriram, why don't you answer this question? And how do you see it unfolding? What are the timelines?
The timeline was actually very initially, right? Couple of years ago, when we'd asked this question, and they told us that we'd see one rolling out every year from then, right? Starting 2 years later. But there have been hang-ups with dealing with Airbus for airframe modification to carry the balance beam radar antenna. So when that deal is struck and we start airframe modifications, then we will see them getting rolled out very quickly, because making the antenna and mission systems and everything inside will not take time. We already have experience from the Netra Mark 1 program. So until that gets signed, we are still nowhere near being clear as to when we'll get the AVACs. But the powers bit that we are confident of getting it done quickly. So yeah, we might see some sort of a deal getting signed, at least getting fixed up very quickly. So hopefully after that, we might see progress. It's the same thing with the Netra Mark 1A program that the Air Force wants. But apparently over there, there is good clarity on where the airframes are going to come from. Apparently even the Air Force has done due diligence there and already identified sources for the airframes. So that should also happen. See, once these happen, you get 6 Embraer platforms and 6 A320 platforms. So it's like going manifold in your AVACs and airborne ISR capability. And even the iStar program hasn't gotten off the ground because the platform selection hasn't happened yet. Once that happens, I'm pretty sure maybe the first platform might take time because it's a brand new platform and systems. But once that happens, I'm sure we can crank them out quickly. So again, it's a question of, let's say, lethargic decision making, if I can put it charitably, because nothing else explains the lack of seriousness in pushing forward with these platforms, given how desperately we need them. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? Indigenization, making bigger platforms inside the country, all of these require a massive boot up the ass. Unless we push a lot of money into these programs and fast track them with somebody with a whip in the hand behind everyone's back, things proceed at the bare minimum speed. And they have to be fast tracked. The XLR SAM program, I'm hearing the radars are ready already. So only the missile systems need to get ready, and we should see tests very soon. The Astra Mark II program, for instance, should not be taking so much time, right? We have seen, even during Balakot, that we desperately had a BVR mismatch. So projects like the Astra Mark II should have been fast tracked. Pour money into the program, pour resources, get it fast tracked, give them more aircraft to do more testing, more facilities, all of it. So unless we're really serious about the 10i, or the 10i is just like a stepping stone, unless we're really serious about taking on the Chinese in a realistic time frame, say within 10 years or something, all of these things have to be like, accelerated at least 3 times at their current speed. Without doing that, yeah, there's no point in talking about fighting anybody.
You have to be ready for a world which has changed. Regime changes happen. We are not in the Washington consensus era anymore. We are in a world of war now. We have to be prepared for that. And okay, Surjit Swain, thank you for your contribution. So Jeffrey Royan has another question. He asks, how do we win the narrative war outside the country given the bias against us? We will see a lot of crowing about India being unsafe for investment because of this terror attack and a retaliation by Western or Chinese propped up groups and NGOs. Yes, there will be, but the way that you will be able to reassure investors is by showing that you are militarily capable. Somebody says, and Sriram also talked about this, why didn't we do suppression of enemy air defenses or destruction of enemy air defenses on the way to the terrorist target? We should be doing that. What is the point in what is this sort of play where I'll go by and I'll just touch those guys and come by? This is not how this is not how things this is not how things should be done going forward. We now have to show that we can militarily humiliate them, attrite them, weaken them. We will buy 10 years of peace, which will be enough for all the investment in the world to come into India. Of course, in the middle of that, we might have an engagement with the Chinese, but if we build up properly in the next 4 years, that engagement will not happen. The Chinese will be deterred from doing something in 2029, right? So that is the thing. So all answers bring us back to the same place. We need to accelerate indigenization, and we need to be ready for drawn out conflicts and the new normal, the regime of today. This is a world characterized by bio warfare, cyber warfare, use of terrorist proxies, and limited conventional engagements, which will be highly intense, limited in space and time, but highly intense. Okay, the sheer amount of munitions that will have to be used will be immense, tremendous actually. So we have to be ready for that. We cannot allow the enemy to present us with a fait accompli. So that is where we are at. Somebody says, somebody has answered that question by saying by winning the war.
Yeah. Couple of points to add, sort of. One is, narrative war is one thing. Economic investment is another thing. We were deathly scared of all of this in the early 2000s when our economy was still shit. Today, after multiple conflicts, we do realize, right? And we've seen the example from the Chinese. The Americans and the Europeans don't like the Chinese at all. In fact, they're actively trying to throttle the Chinese development in the military sphere. But they're falling over themselves trying to, get access to the Chinese market as well as dance to the Chinese tunes to get crumbs from their table. I think that is one lesson we should take, where you can say all sorts of things about me, but ultimately, if my economy is strong enough, right, and if you need my economy, as I think we are number 4 today in the world
in terms of nominal GDP, but of course our per capita income is still a lower middle income country.
It will never become so-called unsafe for investment. They're moving capabilities in droves, right? And we are a far better option than the Chinese today, right? So don't put them together. They have always been parallel, and one does not negate the other, right? So we are far too big and important today compared to the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s, right? For them to say, no, we'll move all our investment somewhere else. We're too big a market. And the other point was coming back to the 10i situation, right? So when you run through your stocks and you place rush orders with private industry or DPSUs for that matter, they will have to figure out their supply chain during a crisis. Figuring out your supply chain to run production at a higher rate during a time of absolute need is invaluable, right? So imagine getting into a shooting war for, say, a month or 2 months, where your factories have to churn out products every day, running multiple shifts. Then you definitely should not have a great supply chain visibility and somebody who can run your supply chain properly. And it is, let's say, very not fancy part of fighting a war and winning a war, but it is essential. Just like food, the old quote
Supply
about
chain and
army
logistics
marches
are
on
the
its
key.
stomach. Yeah,
Supply chain and logistics are the key. Anyway,
yeah,
on that note, we'll have to bring this to an end now, bring this to a close. I think we've touched upon all the main points over here. In my view, the Pakistanis will retaliate, and I don't see how this thing will not escalate, in the coming days. Of course, it will not escalate into something that can't be controlled at all. But yes, in my view, I see this escalating because of the great Western actor. I mean, the great terrorist state next door. Not so great, really, but whatever. In next door, so we have to be prepared. We have to sort of make our civil defense procedures much better than what they are now. We have to build a lot of stuff for civil defense, and we have to build it quickly. These things can be built quickly. A lot of sites, there are lots of basements that can be identified. Those things can all be done, and they need to be done now. We need to do it in earnest. We need to be prepared because deterrence, like I said, deterrence by denial also is important, right? It's not only deterrence by punishment which is important. I mean, it's not just punitive deterrence, but what the French call dissuasion is also important. So, on that note, I would say that the Indian military has done well in taking out these terrorist targets in Pakistan. This is of course, this is much beyond what has been done before. A number of targets have been hit, and in the Pakistani heartland, especially in the Pakistani Punjab
yeah.
heartland, have been hit. And we should be ready for whatever quid pro quo plus Pakistan tries, and we must defeat that. But not only that, as we have said, that if they retaliate, we will. If they escalate, we will retaliate. We need to stick to that as well. If they do come up with a quid pro quo plus, we should not let it just lie there. We should then take it to the next level and look at scenario 10i in all seriousness, because that is how you will really buy the peace, not by just some episodic engagement every now and then. With all that having been discussed, I'll sort of end this show. We all want peace, but sometimes, war is what we get. So we might as well be ready for it. One way or the other, we need to be ready. And with that, thanks for joining in. Jai Hind.
Bye bye.